What I want to do in this video is talk about how does a long travel trail bike like the Transition Sentinel behind me do as an all-arounder, if that's a real word. So all of us as mountain bikers at one point are going to face a dilemma. If you haven't faced it yet, you will face it eventually. How much travel do you really need? Especially if you only have one bike. So I was recently on a trip where usually I get a cabin when we travel to the mountains, and in this case, we camped. And so I did not want to bring two bikes. When I get a cabin, I always bring two bikes. But in this case, I did not want to leave a bike at the campsite or in a vehicle when we were out on all-day rides. So I just brought one bike, and I faced the dilemma. So whether it's a trip or whether it's a buying decision, you have to decide how much travel do you really need. And in this case, I didn't need this much travel. So the Transition Sentinel is a bike with 160 mil travel in the front and 150 in the rear. So before we get further into this video, let's talk about the different categories of bikes. And I'm gonna break it down into four categories. There's cross country, then there's trail, then there's enduro, and then there's downhill. Those are your main four categories of mountain bikes. Now, you'll notice I did not mention downcountry. This is my personal opinion. But my opinion is that downcountry was kind of an interim category until cross-country bikes figured out what they wanted to be when they grew up. And now cross-country bikes want to be 120 front and rear. And I said this many years ago, that's where cross-country bikes are going, and we see it today. For example, the Specialized Epic. If you compare the Specialized Epic to my Transition Spur, which is a downcountry bike, they're the same. Like the geometry is pretty much the same, the travel is the same. So years ago, the Transition Spur was referred to as a downcountry. Today, I refer to it as cross country. Again, this is my opinion. So let's get back to the categories. So within the trail bike category, you actually have two subcategories. So you've got short travel trail, which to me is around 130 millimeters of travel in the front, maybe 140. And about 130 in the back, and then long travel trail, which is, in my opinion, the Sentinel. Now, long travel trail, some people will call it an all mountain bike. They're fairly synonymous. So long travel trail bikes have about 160 in the front, about 150 in the back. So in Transition's line, for example, you've got the Spur, which is their cross country, or if you want to call it down country. Then you've got the Smuggler, which is a short travel trail bike, and then you've got the Sentinel, which is a long travel trail bike. And then you've got the Spire, which is their enduro bike. So enduro bikes are a little bit more niche. Most of us will not need an enduro bike unless you're riding park, or unless you're racing enduro, or you just ride really gnarly stuff. Think going to Whistler kind of thing. But even that, there's flow trails. So you've got to really know that you want an enduro bike. So that brings us to the trail bike. The trail bike category really fits most riders. Most of us are going to be able to go out and explore a lot of stuff on a trail bike, whether it's a short travel or a long travel trail bike. So back to the topic of this video, how does a long travel trail bike do as an all-arounder? Because I knew there were sections where I wanted a long travel trail bike. Now, honestly, the main reason I brought this bike is because it's brand new and I was ready to ride it. I had it in my garage for a couple months, and I really I wanted to get out on it. The trip that I did, the Spur would have been perfect for about 95% of the trails that we rode. There were a few downhills where it was really fun to be on this bike, but I didn't need it for most of the ride. And so I'll kind of just go on a little bunny trail here for a second. And if you're looking to buy a bike, so maybe you're watching this video and you need some buying advice, buy the best bike for the trails that you ride most often, and usually that's your local trails. It's easy to fall into the trap of buying too much bike because you have idealistic dreams of doing, gnarly tech up in the Pacific Northwest, when actually you just ride your local trails 95% of the time. So it's an easy trap to fall into. Fortunately, I'm in a place in my life where I can have a few bikes. I've got 4 in my fleet. The Spur and the Transition Sentinel are my 2 full suspension mountain bikes, and they cover a lot of territory. If I had to just narrow it down to one, I would get a Smuggler, because the Smuggler is a shorter travel trail bike that really can do a lot of what the Sentinel can do, to be honest. The Smuggler is a great bike. But let me go over a few decision points here. One of the main things is who you ride with. So on this trip, the first ride that we did cross-country type trails, which honestly were fine on this bike. I really enjoyed riding this bike. Now, I'm used to riding cross-country bikes, so I know what it's like to get out of the saddle and sprint up a hill. I know what it's like to, be even going down on a downhill, have a super agile bike, because cross-country bikes or shorter travel trail bikes are just more agile and more fun on smoother trails. But even still, this is a great riding bike. But back to my point of who you ride with. So one of the guys was on a full-on cross-country bike. On the downhills, he was just pulling away from me because of the wheels and the tires that he had on that bike. That brings me to another point here. There are four main things that separate all mountain bikes, four main categories, and that is the amount of suspension travel, the weight of the bike, the geometry, and the wheels and tires. And wheels and tires will put in one category. So that's the main thing. So this bike is going to be heavier than a shorter travel trail bike. It's going to have slacker geometry. It's going to have longer travel, so you're sitting up higher. Because of the tires, it's going to roll slower on smooth terrain. Now, when you hit gnarly stuff, this bike has a 2.5 Assegai on the front. It's a big beefy tire, and when you're on pavement and smooth stuff, you can feel the drag. Not too bad. It rolls really well for the amount of tread on it, but still, compared to a cross-country tire, especially when you watch someone just not even pedaling, just drift away from you on a downhill, a smooth downhill. So that goes back to what I was saying, who you ride with. Now, one of the rides that we did, where it was kind of an all-day ride in the mountains, everybody was on a long travel bike, and it was great. And a few people were on e-bikes, so they had to wait for us, but we were on long travel bikes. In fact, one guy was on a specialized enduro. That's 170 millimeters of travel front and rear. So we all were fairly equal in terms of our climbing. And that's the thing, is if you're on a long travel trail bike and other people are on a shorter travel or cross-country bike, they're going to be waiting for you at the top. But on a rough downhill, you're going to be waiting for them at the bottom. So having bikes of kind of equal, type is going to just make the group ride a little bit better. Now, if you have super great fitness and you want to be on a long travel trail bike, then riding with people on lighter weight bikes, it might actually equal the climbing, and you'll have a lot of fun on the descents. Now, I'll go off on a little tangent here and talk about e-bikes, just real quick. So if you don't like e-bikes, just hang with me. To me, that is the number one benefit of an e-bike, is you can get a big burly bike with big burly tires up to the top of a mountain and have plenty of suspension travel on the downhill with the big tires. If one day I ever get an e-bike again, it will be for that reason, just so I can get a long travel bike to the top of the mountain, because climbing on a longer travel trail bike is going to take more effort. I could just feel it. One of the climbs we did was 45 minutes, and you can just feel the weight. Even going around switchbacks with a slacker, front end, the front end is a little bit lighter because you're just sitting up more. And that's another thing about shorter travel trail bikes. Typically, you're stretched out a little bit more. So climbing on them is easier because of that. And so getting these long travel trail bikes up to the top of a mountain, it does take work. And so that's really the big downside to a longer travel bike. And that's why it's a dilemma, because do you want a bike like this that just descends incredibly over rough terrain on a downhill? Or do you want a bike that's going to climb faster, lighter, and be more versatile when you hit smoother trails, cross-country type trails? The first trail system that we rode on the last trip that I went on was pure cross-country. In fact, my hardtail would have been fine. I have a steel 9er hardtail that would have been great on those trails. But again, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, riding this bike on it was no problem. Fortunately, the people we were riding with, especially the guy on the cross-country bike, didn't mind waiting. I told him before the ride, I said, dude, you're going to have to wait for me because I'm going to be on this long travel bike, and he was totally cool with it. So I'll kind of wrap this up with something that I've said in other videos, and it's really worth saying in this video, and that is I would rather be slightly underbiked than overbiked in most situations. Now for this trip, like I said, I kind of mentally geared up for the fact that I really didn't need a long travel trail bike for most of the trails, but still, the trails would have been probably a little bit more fun, a lot of them, on like a smuggler or a spur if we're staying within the transition line. So shorter travel trail bike or even cross-country bike that's full suspension. So really, you know, to wrap it up, you're just going to have to weigh the pros and cons that I mentioned in this video. And really it comes down to climbing and having an agile bike, because a cross-country or short travel trail bike, the agility is so much fun. In fact, I got back on my hardtail after this trip on my local trails, and I was just having a blast on that bike because of how snappy and agile. It's just so responsive. So bikes with less suspension travel, steeper geometry, lighter weight, smaller wheels and tires are just going to be more agile and nimble and more responsive. A long travel bike feels muted, but it's supposed to feel like that, because once you hit gnarly tech on a fast downhill, you need that, you know, bike to mute those things and soften those bumps, because it's a lot of fun. So hopefully things that I mentioned in this video, if you're making a buying decision, will help you, or, you know, if you just are going on a trip and trying to decide what bike to bring, if you have a couple of them like I do, hopefully this video helps. But I would love to hear your comments. This is one of those videos where I really love to hear comments to see if you agree with some of the things that I've said about long travel versus short travel, you know, trail bikes and having a long travel as an all-arounder. So let me know in the comments what you think, and if there's anything I missed, also let me know. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so. You can do that by clicking on the little icon there right below. Thanks for watching.